Okay, Jill, we are live. Oh, and you are muted.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending our presentation this morning, the beauty and benefit of having native plants and pollinators around your home. We're able to do this morning thanks to the help of Jennifer Robertson, who's the adult program specialist with Carbondale Public Library. And we thank them and Jennifer very much for allowing the Daughters of the American Revolution to host this event. We're really excited today to have with us Kim Ernst-Pitcher, and she is the habitat specialist with the Prairie Rivers Network, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a little bit more about Kim and the Prairie Rivers Network during her presentation. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you would like to ask a question, if you will scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom picture, there's on the far right something that says Q&A. If you click on that during the presentation, if you have questions, you can click a question in there. And at the end of the presentation, we'll open up the questions to Kim. You can also, if you're having trouble with that, you can raise your hand and we'll get your question in the Q&A. Jennifer will be able to figure that one out. So if you raise your hand and you can't get into the Q&A for some reason, use that method. So we're going to get started right away. So I will leave it off to our expert, Kim. Take it off.
There we go. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me here today to talk about the beauty and the benefit of having native pollinators around your home. As Jill said, my name is Kim Ernst-Pitcher. I'm with Prairie Rivers Network. And I'll start off by telling you a little bit about PRN. We've been around for over 50 years. I think we're in our 54th year right now of being a conservation organization in Illinois. And we use the creative power of science, law, and collective action to protect and restore our rivers, return healthy soils and diverse wildlife to our lands, and transform how we care for the earth and for each other. We're also the Illinois affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation. Our staff program areas are broad and far-reaching, and they all center on the protection of Illinois water resources and wildlife habitat. Our staff work on renewable energy solutions for Illinois communities, climate change, river corridor protection, wildlife habitat protection, pollinator habitat protection, pesticides, etc. We also collaborate with a broad range of partners throughout Illinois and the nation to build policies that support the protection of the environment. Now, this was a really challenging talk to make, actually, because I could talk about pollinators and insects for days, and narrowing it down to fit stuff in a half an hour is really challenging. So we're going to touch on some of my favorite plants. I'm sure I've left out some of my favorite plants and talk about some of my favorite pollinators and why I think they're important. But we're going to start out with a brief introduction to the threats to our native ecosystems, talk about why biodiversity matters, why it's important to use native plants in our landscaping, talk about important considerations for those plantings, and then I'll give you some examples of trees and bushes and flowering plants that will support pollinators and insects in general. And here, pictured on this main screen, is the caterpillar, a young caterpillar of the eastern tiger swallowtail. And as one of their protective measures, they can look like bird poop when they're small to kind of eliminate or reduce the risk of predation. So obviously these are two maps of Illinois. On the left first, this is the land cover of Illinois in the early 1800s. And the tan represents prairie, the green is forested lands, the blue is obviously water bodies, and the pink spots are developed or settled land. And as you can see, this is a really rich, diverse landscape back in the 1800s. I mean, it's packed with diversity. If you look at the map on the right, the present day land cover in Illinois, it's a very different picture. This map is a little old, but I think that it still is a good representation of how we use our land and how we've changed the landscape. And the yellow in this map is representing agricultural land, and the pink and the blue and the green are still the same as in the other map. The green is forest, the water is blue, and the pink is that developed land. But that agricultural land, there's lots of different types of farms. You know, there's vegetable farms, there's wine, there's vineyards, there's orchards, lots of diverse farms. But the majority of this land is dedicated to growing just two crops, and that is soybeans and corn in Illinois. So we've really done a great job of reducing the amount of diversity on our landscape. And, you know, as we all know, lots of little injuries can add up to become a big problem. And we have removed miles and miles, hundreds and thousands of miles of fence rows and mowed field edges around our state, places where birds and plants used to have refuge and thrive or have nests or find resources as food or water. We've also introduced non-native plant and animal species, which compete with our native species. We've grown our cities. We have urban sprawl, which takes up land. It eats up farmland. It eats up habitat. We've also, through all of these actions, decreased our native plant communities. And we have very few areas that are left undisturbed and serve as year-round places for wildlife to thrive. And then, of course, we have, with all this agriculture and all this development, threats from insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, etc. And this list could be really long, and it is really long, but you get the idea of how a lot of little things with a lot of people doing them can really add up to a big problem. And that's kind of what we're seeing right now with insects. This is an image from a recent publication, The Insect Decline in the Anthropocene, Death by 1,000 Cuts. And I think this illustration really does a good job of showing how, you know, there's all these little damages occurring to our insect populations, and they're adding up to a big problem. We're seeing declines in biodiversity and insect biodiversity worldwide. So why should we care about insects and biodiversity? Well, in order to sustain diversity, we need diversity. We need different types of plants that have different shapes, different forms, they have different functions in the environment. All of these things work together to support diverse animal species. Our thousands of species of pollinators, flies, moths, bees, our bumblebees, wasps, butterflies, they all play the critical role of pollinating the plants in our ecosystems as well as the plants we eat. We can thank pollinators for approximately 1/3 of every bite of, or 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat. That's a big service to us. Additionally, you know, all those critters that a lot of people don't like, but you know, they're really fascinating and valuable, such as ants, beetles, grasshoppers, lacewings, leafhoppers, play really critical roles as well. You know, they're predators. They eat pests that we don't want in our crops and in our gardens. They eat each other. They decompose and break down dead plant material and carcasses. They also are prey. They're food for spiders, other insects, The migratory birds that we all love and that we're all feeding right now really rely on moth and butterfly larvae for rearing their young and their own survival. They're food for mammals, fish, amphibians, and reptiles. So they really make our ecosystems run. And it's important that we protect them. So there, we have all these overwhelming problems and lots of little injuries and cuts to our environment and to our native pollinator populations. But one of the things we can do is grow native. By growing native plants and putting them in our landscape around our home, not only are we connecting ourselves to nature, the nature that evolved for the place we have chosen to live and the place that we are, but we're providing habitat and resources for the wildlife that depend on it. Native plants are really beautiful. They don't get the credit they deserve. They're fascinating, and there's so many bizarre shapes and thicknesses and colors and ranges of plant types that it's just a never-ending, interesting experience. They're also pretty low maintenance. They've evolved to survive in our landscape, and these really, long, wet winters, cold winters, and our summers that we have here down in Southern Illinois, these plants have evolved for this type of climate. And a lot of the animals that we have, again, they support, or a lot of the plants, our native plants support the wildlife, and they have evolved together. They have symbiotic relationships. And we'll talk more about that later on in the talk. Native species are also really good for managing water runoff. You can have them in your rain garden. They have really deep root systems to where they can capture and hold moisture in the water. And they're a lot better than having cultivars. When we have cultivars, we've seen it a million times, they can escape from your garden and populate other areas, populate areas where we don't want them, where we have land in conservation or native habitats, or they become invasive and problematic. And here's an example of the root systems that we can see in native plants. Not all native plants have really deep root systems, but a lot of them do, particularly the grasses. We typically think of all of the life that happens above ground, and there's a lot of life happening above ground. Beetles and wasps and bumblebees are buzzing around. We see butterflies coming in, aphids and ants, and everything is crawling around and eating each other. Small mammals eat the seeds, birds eat the seeds of plants or the insects. There's all of that commotion above ground. But below ground, there's a ton going on too. We have microbes and fungi and bacteria having relationships with root systems and building soil health. There's ant tunnels, there's small mammal tunnels. Many of our moths and butterflies have part of their life cycle where they require debris and soil to go underground and pupate, and then they will overwinter there or transform underground and emerge. So, we really need that protected soil and that protected area below ground. Native plants are great for helping us get that. Now, anyone really, if you have a ledge and some sunlight or even some shade, you can have a pollinator garden. They come in all shapes and sizes. Up here on the left is a photograph of my friend Emily. She works for the Xerces Society for invertebrate conservation. And this is her front yard. She's got native plants. They actually wrap around the side of her house where it's shaded, and she has different species that go there. And she plops plants down here and there, reduces the amount of lawn she has, and really makes a place for the insects that she loves and for birds and wildlife. Down at the bottom here is a picture of a prairie on our property. And, we love going out here. This is a little bit of a larger area. It's a couple acres, and we love watching it change and watching all of the birds come in and the insects come in. And that's, a much larger area, but if you have the space available, it's great to put something like this in. And then over here on the right, my friend Lika in Washington, D.C. has probably 12 native plants and pots on her balcony. And she's always texting photos or telling me things that she's seen on her ledge, and from native pollinators to birds that come in. So there's all shapes and sizes of native habitat and way that you can put a garden on your property. There are several things that we want to consider when we're putting in a planting. First of all, it's important that you get regionally adapted or locally adapted local ecotypes. You know, our animals, again, they've evolved to utilize these plants. These plants are conditioned here, and it's important to protect and you know, protect the genetics of these plants and use local ecotypes. You want to consider your soil. You know, obviously, just like any garden, wet plants prefer wetter areas, dry prefer drier. There's a little bit of wiggle room here, I've found, with some of the native plants because they're able to kind of go with the flow and the shifts in nature. But there's still, you know, certainly preferences. And when you're purchasing plants, it's important to pay attention to that. The same is true with the amount of sunlight that your area is going to get. Make your choices if you want perennial or annual. I like both. Annual have the benefit of, you know, they reseed just like, you know, perennial do, but sometimes you can move annuals around a little bit easier, I think, and you get a little bit more diversity and variety. Pick out what plant shapes and sizes. Some native plants get really big. Some of them are bushy. Some of them can be 10, 11 foot tall. And some of them like to kind of really spread out. So be conscientious of that. And that also kind of depends on where you're putting them and what your soil type is. And sometimes you won't know exactly how that plant's going to behave until you put it in. Don't forget about trees, shrubs, and woody perennials. They're really important types of plants for pollinators. Trees are one of the early nectar sources for a lot of our native bees and pollinators. We have a old silver maple at the top of our drive, and every spring it is like the first tree that blooms and it hums. You can be, you know, 10 feet away from the edge of that tree and you can hear these bees, and it's just covered with bees. So trees are really important as well. And we'll talk more about their relationship with moths and butterflies in the talk. Grasses. Grasses are really important, and I'm not talking about turf grass or lawns. These are native grasses with those deep roots. They're valuable parts of the landscape, and they can be used as a screen or a focal point in your garden very easily, and they're beautiful. Some more things to think about, you know, what types of wildlife do you want to attract? Do you want to bring in pollinators, birds? Usually you get both, or other wildlife. And then kind of tailor your food sources if you would like to those types. Or you can pick your favorite plants and see what comes in. But if you're aiming to get pollinators, it's a good idea to do a little bit of digging and find out, you know, what specific types of pollinators will I get with these plants. It is important whether you're doing a big garden or a small area. If you want to support life year round, that diversity in shapes, flower types, the timing of the flowers, the shapes of the flowers are all really important so that there's a nectar available early in spring and all the way through the fall. I always put water out, even if it's just a small like drainage catcher from the bottom of flower pots, those little shallow pans. I put those out in my flower beds by the house underneath some of my larger plants where they have some shade, and put some marbles or some gravel or something in there so insects don't drown, but that offers a watering hole that's not directly in the sun so that insects and birds and things can have some water. Bare ground. It's not something many people think about, but it's really important, especially for some species of our native bees. So not mulching everything, leaving some areas bare, even if it's under a tree or on the edge where you don't really care if there's some bare ground there. It's a good idea to have some available. And also bee houses. You know, we have a lot of habitat at our place, but we have bee houses because we love to watch them. It's great to sit there with the kids and see who's going in and out and packing in pollen and laying an egg, or who's emerging. You can see the antennae and the little legs come out, and it's this really neat experience to watch that happen. Here in this photo, on this black-eyed Susan, this is a leaf cutting bee. And she's packing that pollen on her belly. She's really just a fascinating, beautiful bee. And she came to our garden 2 years ago, was the first time we saw her. Now, maintenance is a really big deal. I said, you know, native plants don't require a lot of maintenance. And that's true, they don't. But how you maintain your flower bed or your planting is really important. A lot of these animals need the mulchy layer in flower beds and gardens to overwinter and to complete their life cycle. So, you know, if you trample around there in the fall and you're cutting down the stems of your plants, you know, they've got all these dead curled leaves. Some of those curled leaves are probably holding caterpillar or moths that are going to overwinter. Some of those leaves on the ground probably have the same thing. And it's best if you can leave that alone. And that's a big cultural thing. We remove our leaves, we clean up gardens all the time, but what we're really doing is hurting our efforts to create, you know, habitat for these animals year round. And this is just a PSA that I found on Facebook that I thought was, you know, helpful to have something like this pop up in your feed to just kind of remind you that, oh yeah, fall's coming, winter's coming, and I should probably leave that mess in my garden because it's a good thing. Go have a cup of tea with your friend instead. Don't clean it up. This is our native post, or this is our post oak, state champion post oak, and it's in Washington County. This is one of my favorite trees. I love this tree. It's absolutely magnificent. And I'm just going to discuss a couple trees that are really good for pollinators. And I've chosen some because they're common and they're already here. And I like for people to think about these trees as being resources for wildlife, not just something that shades our house. And then I put some that are, you know, beautiful and ones that we're likely to purchase or put in our landscaping. Oaks are magnificent trees in general. They're just beautiful. They're keystone species in our central hardwood forests. They're also they're also the host plant for over 500 species of moths and butterflies. And in the purple here, these purple numbers that you'll see occasionally throughout the slides, if I was able to find the numbers, I'd put the numbers of moth and butterfly species that are supported by these plants. And, you know, oaks are huge. They support 15 species of our big, beautiful, charismatic silk moths, like the Luna moth, and they're just great for pollinators. Also birches. We have the river birch down here in some Illinois in some places. Great. Insects love birches. They're great sources of pollen, and their seeds offer a lot of resources for wildlife, and they support over 500 species of or 400 species of moths and butterflies. Willows are another great one, 450 species. They're typically really easy to propagate. You can take a cutting of most species and stick it in the ground in the spring, and you can grow your own willow trees. They're great pollen and nectar sources for lots of our native bees as well. I'm going to apologize if I have some of these names wrong. I know some of these change a lot of times, and I'm not the best plant person, so I'm not a taxonomist. So if they're incorrect, you can PM me, let me know, and I'll fix them. I've done my best in trying to fact check things lately. Here are some of our native trees that most people will see or connect with. The pawpaw is not one you really think of with pollinators, but it is the host plant for the zebra swallowtail. The eastern redbud, a really important early spring nectar source for a lot of our native bees, and it's also the host plant for Henry's elfin butterfly. And then we have Cara, the hickories, great for silk moths, really good host plants for a lot of moths and butterflies, and just all around beautiful trees. Now, I really love shrubs and bushes. They're so many fascinating and interesting shrubs and bushes in Illinois. I'm originally from Virginia, and this region down here in Southern Illinois just has a tremendous amount of really attractive biodiversity that's native, and I've had a good time learning about them. Buttonbush is one of my favorite. It's cool looking. That little balled up flower is great for attracting bees and butterflies. Elderberry, giant flower heads. You know, we all know elderberry from the syrup and things like that, but it's also a good pollinator plant for beetles and flower flies. We have wild hydrangeas, spice bush, which is not really showy, but it is the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail, which is a really beautiful butterfly. New Jersey tea, great nectar sources for native bees, host plant to 36 species of moths and butterflies. This is a wild climbing rose that we have on our property, and this is something that just naturally occurred on our property, and we've let it go and is actually climbing up our now defunct strawberry bed. And it's huge. It's really huge. But every summer it is full of bumblebees, and I mean full. And I don't know if you can see this video, but these bumblebees just go crazy, spinning around and gathering nectar on this climbing rose. And I think it's a beautiful wild rose. I think it's prettier than a lot of the cultivars that we have. There are a lot of vines that are also really good for wildlife. The Virginia creeper, I know it's not beautiful and showy, but it does have a lot of value for wildlife and insects. It offers a lot of cover for predation to occur. They can hunt down in there and under all those leaves. It's a good host plant for numerous types of moths and butterflies. So we try to leave the Virginia creeper whenever we can. There's several different common names. I'm using the common names that are most familiar to me for a lot of these native plants, but I have the scientific names underneath them. Purple passion flower is beautiful, also great for butterflies. Some of these plants you may have seen out in the wild, or you might even have growing, you know, along your garage or something like that. The trumpet honeysuckle is our native honeysuckle, is one of the native honeysuckles, and we have 2 of these plants growing along the south side of our house, up some lattice, and in 2 years they've grown up to the 2nd story. And it's funny, we planted them for, you know, their benefit to pollinators, but also for their beauty. And last summer they were magnificent, full of flowers, lush, just taking over. And about a week later, you know, we're outside and we look at the south side of the house and half of that plant is gone. And we're like, oh my gosh. And we look closely, and my sons and I found dozens of caterpillars, and they were the caterpillars for the hummingbird moth, the sphinx moth, and or hawk moth. And they had just, I mean, it's a host plant for them, and they found it and they were doing great on that. And so we were able to grab some of those caterpillars, feed them. They're overwintering in a butterfly cage. We'll watch them emerge next spring. But, you know, that's why we planted that plant. And we weren't upset that it was defoliated, not once we realized what was going on. But, you know, that's part of what you want to consider when you're planting these plants. If you see things eating your plants, you know, I encourage you, don't go out and spray it, because what's eating it is probably a larval form of the very reason you planted it. So just wait and see, lift up some leaves, look a little gently underneath at the bottom of the stems and see what you find, and grab a book and key it out. It's entertainment all season long. This is a photo of Eric and Ann Stahlhuber's property, one of their pollinator plots. And I wish I had taken the photo when this was covered with the bees and butterflies. I'm sure they're in there, but it's really hard to see. This is one of their patches of native plants, and this is full of Liatris species and a rattlesnake master. And so Liatris is the purple spiky plants. There's several species in here, and great for butterflies, great for pollinators. If you go out the right time of day, it's just covered in butterflies. These rattlesnake masters are also really cool. It's hard to see the leaves, but they're green, and they kind of look like yucca. I mean, hence the sign them. And the flower heads are really great. Native flies, native bees, butterflies all really love to get the nectar from those flower heads. And they're just a beautiful plant to have as a feature plant in a planting. They have a ton of them, and it's really awesome if you ever get the chance to go out there and visit their farm. Here's a couple other favorites of mine. Joe Pyeweed. Joe Pyeweed can get, warning, really, really tall. Sometimes, 10 or 11 feet tall. But there are species that won't get so tall if they're in the shade and things like that. But they're great for pollinators, great sources of nectar, and they're beautiful flowers. Baptisia species, the white and the wild indigo, host plant to the wild indigo dusty wing. And then on the right here, we have cup plants, which are one of my favorite silphiums. They bloom later in the season and big attractant to butterflies and bees. And the leaves kind of clasp, and I'm using the wrong term because I'm not a botanist, but they surround essentially the whole stem, and there's a cup in there, and hence the name cup plant. And there's dew, the dew gathers in that, the rainwater gathers in that, and we'll walk down and see all kinds of animals utilizing those pockets of water, and oftentimes we see tree frogs sitting in those little pockets in the leaves. A great plant. And of course, everyone loves to create a home for the monarchs. We have 22 species of native milkweed in Illinois, and monarchs are just a beautiful, magnificent species. And but the plants, the milkweed plants are just as cool and come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And this is, over here on the left is common milkweed flowerhead, and you can just see the tons of bumblebees that are feeding off of that. So milkweeds are always a good choice. Common milkweed can get a little aggressive in a small planting situation. Sometimes it's easier to choose one of the other types of milkweed if you have limited space, because they will sucker off and spread. Conversely, I've had a really hard time in larger plantings getting milkweed to take off, but in my flower bed, it goes crazy. So you just have to kind of take what you get sometimes. This is a shot of from our prairie, and you'll see penstemon, which has got a trumpet-shaped flower. A lot of your bees and bumblebees will crawl in there, buzz vibrate, or they'll pierce the side to get the nectar. Spiderworts, Ohio spiderwort is a great plant to have down here, especially for early sources of nectar. It's in the spring when it comes to bloom. You can see in the background that yellow, there's a little bit of some of the wingstem species that we have, and then up in the front, commonly called butterfly weed or butterfly milkweed. This is that same area a few weeks later. You can see that yellow has really changed. It's a lot of that wingstem. There's 2 species back in there. They've really taken off, and this is their season. The milkweeds are still kind of fluxing this time of year. The butterfly milkweeds butterfly weed, and the penstemon is kind of changing. Also in here, but not photographed, or Monarda. There's the mountain mints. There's Virginia mountain mint, slender mountain mint, different kinds of mountain mints that bloom for a long time and can provide a steady source of nectar for many native plants or native insects. And here, a few weeks later, the goldenrods are up, the New England asters are up. This is also the time when plants like obedient plant, your verbenas, your verbenas, hyssops are all coming on and starting to bloom towards the end of the season. Those late season nectar and pollen resources are really important. They're gonna help these bees that overwinter prepare their young, prepare their own nest so that they can make it through a long, cold winter. And if you don't have a lot of sun and you have a lot of shade, there's a lot of different options you can have. And I'm going to share resources and the names of some people that you can talk to that know a lot more about these plants than I do at the end of the talk. But phlox species are great. Wild ginger is one of my favorite plants. I think the leaves are beautiful. They last a long time. They're great around the bottom of trees. Wild geraniums are another good one. Mist flower is a light, tiny, it's got tiny little purple flowers, pinkish purple flowers. It's late in the season. It's a great nectar source. I think it's also really beautiful. It can grow as a weed in some situations like fields that are grazed, because I guess cattle don't prefer it, but it is a really good nectar source late in the season, along with some of your bonesets, pieweeds, the bellworts, and everybody loves columbine, of course, which and actually grow down in wooded areas. And then, did you guys lose me? Okay, it says my internet connection is unstable. There's ferns. Most people don't think of ferns for pollinators, but ferns and ginger and plants like that, they're great to have in shaded areas underneath trees, because I think people tend to disturb the leaves and the debris that has fallen less when we have plants like that on the ground. And that kind of lets you be surprised in the spring when these ferns pop up and the fiddleheads come up and the all of these spring flowers pop up. You have that debris there, and you've allowed that to stay underneath those leaves to protect the insects that are overwintering. And I know this is a lot of information, but there's really, we could talk for a long time about these things. Native grasses are surprisingly important for pollinators. They allow them to have places to sleep, to overwinter, to build nests, and they're also host plants for quite a few different species. So while they can be beautiful and serve as focal points, buying some native grasses also is really important to have in your planting for pollinator nest sites and host plants. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, Prairie Rivers Network is a affiliate, the Illinois affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation, and they have certified wildlife habitat program. And basically it's this program where you meet all of the requirements and you certify your habitat with them, and then you'll get a sign that you can put in your yard saying, this is my certified wildlife habitat. It can be co-branded with Prairie Rivers if you want, but it is a good education piece to let people know that, this is habitat. This beautiful space is habitat for wildlife. And there's lots of websites. My resources page is woefully incomplete, but there's some really good ones here. The Natural History Survey, the Xerces Society for Vertebrate Conservation, is a wealth of information. NWF, On NWS page, there's also a native plant finder tool, which I'll talk about here in a minute. It was designed by NWF and Doug Tallamy and all of his crew. And this is it. This is a screenshot of it. You can go in here, type in your zip code. It'll pull up the native plants in your area. This is a work in progress. It's not complete. So there's not a lot of photographs for everything, and they don't have all of the species, but it's becoming better every day, and it's a really neat tool. They also let you know how many species use that plant or that group of plants as a host plant. And you can do it for butterflies and moths. You can search butterflies and moths in your area. You can search trees, bushes, vines, anything. So again, not complete, but there is a lot of information in there, and it's a fun tool to play around with, or even let your children or grandchildren play around with. And if you're gonna buy native plants, please buy local if you can. Again, regional ecotypes, local ecotypes, regionally sourced. We have buyers, or we have growers here in Southern Illinois, Southern Wood Gardens. They grow a lot of different types of native plants. Tabor Nursery in Carbondale also grows native trees. We have many groups in town, Green Earth, Native Plant Society, just to name a couple, that have native plant sales every spring. You know, these are good ways to talk about the plants with the people you're buying them from and ensure that you're getting something that is regionally sourced and you're supporting a local grower. Carbondale's Farmers Market as well. There's a lot of growers there. Southern Wood Gardens is there in the spring and the summer. And then if you can't find what you want, Prairie Moon Nursery is a really good resource. You can order seed from them. You can order live plants from them, and they'll tell you, you know, where you can call them if you can't figure it out on their website of where the seeds were sourced, and make sure that they are native to your area. And then here's just a list of books and a picture of a sweet pollinating fly. But there's tons of books out there. One of my absolute favorites is, and that's because I have young children and I work with people that are just learning about butterflies, but is this. And it's the it's the life cycles of butterflies. And I've got it on my list here. Host plants, nectar plants, pictures of eggs, pictures of butterflies, pictures of chrysalises. Just a fun beginner book for people that are interested in learning about butterflies and moths. And if you're a larger grower, 100 Plants to Feed the Bees by the Xerces Society and their book Farming with Insects are both really good as well. So I have talked a lot and given you a lot of information, but I'm happy to take some questions, or if I can't answer them, refer you to people that know a lot more than me. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kim. Can everyone hear me? Okay, we do have several questions that have come in. First one is from Catherine Hollister. It says, a yard where old house used to be, how might I prepare for wildflowers? It is now weeds and high grass. Is it possible to just throw out seeds, landing where they may?
Yeah, so it is possible. You won't have as good success as you would if you prepared the soil. You can, bare minimum, I would mow it really low if you can, and then even take a rake or do something to disturb that soil a little bit so that you can get seed to soil contact. If you're just going to toss out seeds for most native plants, you need to do it in the late fall or early winter when they can have that freeze thaw cycle that will pull them down into the ground and they'll get that good contact. A lot of our native plants, they need to be cold, wet stratified or moist stratified. And so they need that process. They've evolved to have that happen so then they can germinate in the spring. And it might take, you know, a couple years for you to see results that way. But yeah, I mean, that's how we seeded our place. We burned the land before and then seeded in the winter initially. So.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Okay, another question has come in. How do we know if plants are native plants or invasive species?
Field guides and call friends who know plants. There are lots of field guides out there. Sometimes keying up plants can be really challenging, hence calling a friend that knows plants. There are some tools out there that you can snap a picture and it'll give you information. They're not always accurate, but it might at least get you in the right direction of what type of plant or what family of plant it is. Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Joe.
Is that an app on your phone that you can add to your phone or something?
Yeah, there's several. The only one I can think of is Plant Snap off of the top of my head, but there's several. I'm not sure which is the best.
Okay, Plant Snap. Okay, let's see. Question, what type of oak can we plant that grows more quickly than others?
Oh, I don't know if I can answer that. I think pin oaks grow pretty quickly, but I'm not sure. I would have to see, you know, I'd have to talk to an arborist or a grower about that. But, and I think a lot of it also depends on, you know, if you can buy trees that have really developed root balls, and that will give you a really good jump start on getting your oaks established.
Okay. All right. How can we make or where can we buy a bee house?
You can make them pretty easily. Just making a frame, like a little house frame. Essentially, it's a box with a peaked roof, and you can cut small lengths of bamboo and tie them in bundles and pack them in. You can also put just twigs in there and some bunched grasses. You can buy them. I don't know where you can buy them locally. But I know that you can find them online, but they are pretty easy to make if you have some scrap wood and some access to bamboo and things.
Okay. So go to Amazon then, maybe.
Yeah, preferably local if we can find it. But some of our local stores might have, you know, bee houses in the spring. Hardware stores will probably have them.
Okay, so they're just a bunch of bamboo sticks hollowed out and hooked together.
Yeah, so I mean, they come in all different sizes. Some of them are, you know, like a foot long. Some of them are, you know, they don't have to be very long, usually just about 4 to 5 inches long, these segments of tube, when bamboo kind of makes a natural tube that's easy to use. And the easiest thing to do is tie them together so that they don't all fall out at the same time, you know, if you have to clean or something. So if you bundle them, it's easier to take them out if you need to remove them for some reason. And they're just packed in there, and the bees go in and lay their eggs and pack them with pollen and bee bread.
Okay, awesome. All right. What types of native plants would be good for a beginner to start with?
I think that depends on, you know, what size you're looking for, and size of a planting you're looking for, and whether you have shade or full sun. But you know, I would recommend calling, you know, Eric Stahlheber or Ann Stahlheber and talking with them at Southernwood Gardens about what types of plants would be good for them and their planting. They're a really good local resource.
Okay. And let's see. By the way, this video and the questions afterwards will be available from the library by going to the library site and looking up a link. So if you didn't get to copy down everything that you saw on the screens, you can go back to the library website. It should be up within a week or so.
It will actually, Jill, be on the library's YouTube channel, not our website. So go ahead and Google Carbondale Public Library YouTube and you should be able to find it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for that correction. Carbondale Library YouTube. All right, Carbondale, Illinois Library YouTube, or?
It wouldn't hurt to put that, but if you put Carbondale Public Library YouTube, you should be able to find it.
Okay. All right, great. All right, it looks like we have time for one more question. So I'm going to be selfish and ask it because it's my own question. I did not cut down all of my hyssops and asters and coneflowers this fall like I usually do. I usually cut them down and then put the tops into another wildflower planting that I have out in the field, but I just didn't have time. And I noticed this winter that the birds are really going crazy and eating the coneflower, hyssop, and aster seeds. So I'm just wondering if maybe I should never cut down my hyssop, coneflowers, and asters and let the birds eat them.
Yeah, I would leave them. I mean, that's what they need. That's some of their favorite food. And finches, you'll see goldfinches just terrorize each other for your coneflowers in the winter. So whatever you can leave for the wildlife, leave it. It's good.
All right. Well, thank you very much to all the attendees and to the Daughters of the American Revolution for making this possible. The Daughters of the American Revolution is a nonprofit service organization, and a lot of what we do is in the field of conservation, historic preservation, and we also work with veterans and schools. So if you're interested in membership with the Daughters of the American Revolution or want to know more about it, please contact me, Jill Rendelman, at 618-308-0217. And in the future, look for other programs that we will sponsor hosted through the Carbondale Public Library. Thank you very much for your attendance today. And you now have Kim's face and you've got some information about her. I'm sure she'd be willing to talk to you as well. Okay.
Yes.
Take care.